I hope you'll forgive me for filming some of this while I'm on holiday, but there are a few reasons. First of all, I want to make you jealous. Secondly, it's a more interesting backdrop than the part of Surrey where I live. But thirdly, the chorus of Spanish voices you often hear at this lovely little cafe. Not so much today, it's not so noisy, but sometimes you hear people shouting and chatting and just trying to get in their word. You can tell the people who live around here thrive on gossip and debate. Language, whatever the language, is one of the things that makes us human. That's why to lose that ability is so devastating. Chekhov said something like, all happy families are happy in the same way, but all unhappy ones are unhappy in different ways. I think certainly that same is true of people who have Parkinson's, us Parkers. For instance, I don't really have a tremor. I do want to touch my iPhone, but not so you can see. I'm staggeringly slow. But the main thing is my voice. It's just changed so much. It's weaker, indistinct, sometimes indecipherable. And I can't be heard. I literally can't make myself be heard. Rory, your missus is missing. Back in London, in Notting Hill.
Departs for Cambridge at 5:30 a.m. on Monday.
This is our deluxe state-of-the-art studio, well, in the back of a pub, where we record our podcasts about Parkinson's, movers and shakers. And I spoke about my voice in a recent episode. Hello once more from us movers and shakers. We're in the pub again, having a bit of a chat, bit of a moan, bit of a laugh too. Laughter comes as easily as it ever did, but the chatting is much harder for me, and even my ordinary conversation sounds like moaning to my own ears, distinctly querulous and pathetic. I'm Mark Mardell. Sometimes I feel like saying, cue violins. I used to be Mark Mardell.
Mark Mardell, BBC News, Northern France. Mark Mardell, BBC News, Alabama. The importance of God and the family, the wrongness of Hollywood and big government.
All my working life I've been a broadcast journalist, from my very first job on Radio Tees in Stockton to my last as presenter of The World at One on Radio 4. I've used my voice. For 4 decades I was on the TV and radio. As Newsnight's political correspondent.
The suggestion is that the then Home Secretary was interfering, telling his prisons director how to do his job, at the same time as claiming he had no responsibility for operational matters and so wouldn't himself resign after a series of prison escapes. The allegation continues that Mr Howard misled the House of Commons about who really removed the governor of Parkhurst Prison after a big breakout there. What really happened? Indeed, last week, Mr Howard seemed very uncertain about the whole matter.
I was entitled to express my opinion, and that is what I did.
With respect, that is not answering the question of whether you threatened to overrule him.
It's dealing with the relevant point, which is what I was entitled to do and what I was not entitled to do. And I have dealt with this in detail before the House of Commons and before the Select Committee.
But with respect, you haven't answered the question of whether you threatened to overrule him.
As BBC's first Europe editor.
The leaders who met under this vast glass dome also talked about transport and pollution and solar power. But what saved President Sarkozy's grand vision from mockery is a grand purpose, aiming to end one of the most intractable disputes in the world.
Then as North America editor.
Just as the mighty Mississippi carves its way down the centre of the United States, so Obamacare divides this country politically, and it too has the potential and the power to transform the landscape all around it. It will be this president's legacy, and whether it succeeds or fails in states like this will be hugely important for his party and his reputation.
You can imagine I never thought my face was my fortune, but my voice rang out as clear as a bell, and doing that day in, day out builds a confidence that's reflected in public and in private. Reporting on the EU is the one that's hard, of course. Hard to explain, not really so hard to be fair and balanced, but very hard to convince people that you are, and a much harder sell to programmes and editors. And I think that's what a lot of the criticism would come back to, if people are worried about the BBC and other coverage, is the need for that hard sell and the need for people in the job really pressing their point of view. Nostalgia isn't what it used to be. Back in the present, moving and only slightly shaking, Rory Kethlen-Jones gets ready for recording another episode of our podcast. I'm already in place. I do obviously still keep my hand in at broadcasting with movers and shakers, but don't run away with the idea that the problem with my voice is a reflection of my pride in my broadcasting voice, my broadcasting career. Like a lot of people who broadcast frequently. I never really liked the sound of my voice. I thought it was too reedy and too thin, really. And but after years and years of listening back to everything you say, hundreds of times, you just get used to it. It's just another tool in the toolbox. When that tool snaps, it can turn a friendly pub, like the one where we record our podcast, into alien territory. My wife always used to say I had the loudest voice in the room. She always used to tell me to quieten down. And I was never worried about the idea of dominating a debate, making my voice heard. And I guess I was always rather proud of the fact that I had opinions, expressed them very clearly, and got them across, and sometimes even made people laugh. The judge's dog Bilbo is still all ears, others don't hear. And it is very difficult in environments like this because people literally can't hear what you're saying. I can barely hear my own voice above the chatter of the people around me. You get used to shopkeepers or servers or barmen or waiters or whatever leaning in to hear what you say. But that's not the worst of it. The worst of it, to be honest, is being in a family setting. Our debates are often rumbustious and just delightful. I've always loved taking part in those debates. And now I find that I'm almost having to hold my hand up and say, "Excuse me, I'm still here. I'm not a ghost, I'm not dead yet." And the trouble is, people still don't hear me. And it's very difficult. So that does make me feel diminished and lessened. And sort of less of myself, really, because if you can't talk, if you can't communicate, who are you? Somebody's walking away and you want to shout at them, you do shout at them, but they just don't hear you. I dramatised some of this for the British Voice Association at their annual general meeting. The fifth time I've been ignored, I crank up the volume as high as it'll go and it comes out as an angry shriek. I said I'll do the dishwasher after I finish writing this piece, you just aren't listening. Jo, my wife, snaps back. I hate it when you use that tone, you're just being rude and aggressive. It's not a tone, it's my voice, that's what my voice sounds like now, you've got to get used to it. The trouble is I haven't taken my own advice, I haven't got used to the way I sound now. And while it's true trying to be too loud comes out like a petulant banshee wail, that at least is in part because I do feel petulant, ignored, frustrated, angry and diminished. Right, that's quite enough of my moaning. It's hardly in the spirit of movers and shakers. We're positive. We not only seize the day, but shake it like a terrier and seek solutions. So what can be done?
As important as increasing your volume is also changing your rate and your pacing.
Quite a lot. John Dean is a voice and speech therapist specialised in treating people with Parkinson's.
People forget just how important communication is and the interactions that we have, and it's a big part of being human. And so if something's going to interfere with that, and that can be the voice for sure. The voice is a big component of that. But then there's an awful lot of other components, like the way that your face is conveying what you're trying to convey as well. So the changes in facial expression, the facial masking, that can be a change that can cause difficulties in communication. And I look at someone like you. If you are a professional voice user, you're someone who used your voice for a living. That's going to have a huge influence on your identity. And if that changes over time, I can only imagine what you're contending with.
What's actually happening to my voice? What is it?
Well, I think it's very important to realize that whatever you can see in Parkinson's, with the slowness of movement and the muscle stiffness or the rigidity, those things that are visible are also happening in places where they're not visible. So that change, maybe where you're walking slower, or maybe your handwriting's gotten smaller, that's going to translate to the muscles involved in speech production. And that can be the voice itself, that can be the vocal folds coming together, that can be the articulators, the lips and the teeth and the tongue. And it combines in a way that really influences speech at every level along the chain of speech production. So your vocal folds don't approximate, they don't get close together, they don't make that nice seal, they get basically a little bit of bowed vocal folds, and therefore now you're not producing as much you're not producing as much sound. So the sound is not coming out, you also have air leaking through that gap, that adds some white noise. You bring that up to the next part where you're shaping that vibration into speech sounds, and maybe your tongue doesn't come all the way up against the back of your teeth when you're making a T sound or a D sound, and now there's some more air in there, some frication as we call that. And so all of a sudden your signal becomes a lot less clear and clean and crisp, and it's harder to be understood. And then if you're speaking in a noisy environment, it just adds to that. You know,
That's a brilliant explanation. I mean, nobody's actually explained it that clearly before. And what I hadn't struck me is, because we're so used to speech, you just think of it as something you just do, but it's a very complex movement with lots of different moving parts in it.
well, you know, I think we're starting to find with artificial intelligence that there are communication styles in other animals, but we're really the most advanced. Speech and communication and language in general is among the most complex maneuvers that anyone can do, that any animal can do. So yeah, it is very complex. Doesn't take much to throw it off.
Might I find the solution here? Epsom Hospital is very familiar. Joe had 2 of our 3 kids here. My mum died here. We've had the usual visits to A&E and checkups and scares that come between the big moments of birth and death. This is an important day for me. Seems I'm going to get my first treatment on the NHS for my voice. Now, it seems months ago that I was promised Lee Silverman training on the NHS. I jumped through hoops after that. I had to go to a physiotherapist who seemed more concerned about whether I could swallow or not and whether I should have jelly put in my drinks so I could. I've never actually had any problem with swallowing, really. And then I went to ENT to make sure it wasn't anything else that was causing problems with my voice. And then I got a letter saying it had been cancelled due to staff shortages, so that left me feeling rather deflated. But I got back from my recent holiday to find a letter saying that I was invited to a group session, which then turned out nobody wanted to go to where the group session was planned, so they were having individual sessions, which is better still, I suppose. And here I am, my local hospital. So I'll go in and let you know what it was like in a minute, or an hour, in fact. Well, I found that very useful, very helpful, actually. It's basically sounds pretty simple, just trying to be louder. So I've got a series of phrases I've got to practice every day, but I've only got 4 written down here. Yes, I'll have another cup of coffee. I'm going to take a shower now. What do you want to eat this evening? Can we switch the radio off now? And various things like that. So I'm going to practice this every day and see whether it works. But the idea is to think loud and to project your voice more. And it feels a bit weird because it's artificially putting it on as though I was putting on an accent or something. But I'm trying to be louder the whole time.
Well, you're referring to what's now called LSVT Loud, but they used to be called Lee Silverman Voice Therapy. And actually, it was developed by a researcher in Colorado, where I was previously, and another one down in Arizona. And Lee Silverman was actually the initial person that they worked with. They had this person living with Parkinson's, and they found just by increasing her effort level, she could improve her speech production and her communication. And that's another factor that we really should recognize in Parkinson's is a lot of times the sensory input that you're getting for your effort level is diminished, and it doesn't correlate with the output of your muscles anymore. So a big focus of the LSVT Loud program now is to recalibrate that so that you use much more effort in order to produce clearer speech. But I'll bet you if you've tried it at all, the first time you did it, you're like, I feel like I'm shouting. This sounds like I'm a crazy person. And it's only a mismatch of your sensory system. I bet you if your wife was listening, she goes, nope, that sounds exactly like, that sounds like mine.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes, I'll have another cup of coffee. 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 God, you feel silly doing it.
You're doing something interesting, though. I don't know if you caught it on the 3rd time. You took a little bit of time. You maybe got a little more air. And I think as important as increasing your volume is also changing your rate and your pacing with little pauses. And that pauses helps people understand you, but it also helps you keep up with your own speech production. So about the 3rd one, you're like, yes, can I have another cup of coffee? Yes, can I have another cup of coffee? Then you went, yes, can I have another cup of coffee? And all of a sudden the pitch came in there and the intonation and the prosody. It does feel a little bit silly, but there are ways to get around that. I mean, you mentioned using speech recognition software. Well, that's an opportunity to maybe train one while you're working on the other. Put on your announcer's voice and use your dictation software. That's a valuable way to practice that maybe carries that over a little bit.
Got my functional phrases here, and I've got one more session with the NHS speech therapist, and I found them really very, very useful indeed. Lots of techniques like sitting up straight, thinking about articulating more clearly, speaking slower, which I find difficult, but I'll try and speak slower. And generally, I've just found the sessions rather cathartic, talking about the problem, as indeed I've found making this film cathartic as well. But I think the key to it is when they finished and in between, keeping on practicing with these phrases. And also another hint, read poetry, because of the rhythm just helps you project your voice. I'm going to try a bit now. Midwinter, spring, its own season, semi-paternal through sodden towards sundown, suspended in time between pole and tropic. Slow down, Mark. When the short day is brightest with frost and fire, the brief sun flames the ice on pond and ditches, in windless cold that is the heart's heat, reflecting in a watery mirror. So I hope I'll keep going. I hope I won't get any worse anyway, and I feel actually more confident, a lot more like myself. So I'll end off by saying, this is Mark Mardell, Movers and Shakers, Surrey.